convincing your customer it will be better for them to use this is an incredibly challenging, but also incredibly rewarding journey. But some of the trends we're talking about are very consistent and can be used to go pick your next opportunity for yourself. The hardest things we all get to do as leaders is try to change human behavior.
Hello and welcome for this episode of Confluent Developer. I'm Viktor Gamov and I will be your host for today's exciting episode. Today's guest is Leonid Igolnik. Leonid is an incredible person to have a conversation with. I consider him a friend, mentor, and all-around great person to have you in the corner. Leonid, welcome to Confluent Developer.
It's good to see you again, Vic. It's been a while and we don't connect often enough lately.
Yeah, but we always, every time when we connect, it's still always good time, always great time. Leonid, so in this podcast, in the Confluent Developer podcast, we're trying to find it's a little bit of research of origin of the modern luminaries, of the modern leaders who establish industries, and we like to learn a little bit more, not as a kind of like what they do right now or what's your take on AI. Obviously, we're going to talk about this because it's a hot topic, but we start this conversation usually to understand where are people coming from. So, our usual first question to start this recording, to start this discussion is, first of all, in your words, what are you, like who are you and what are you doing? And after that, we're going to go into this next set of questions.
I guess professionally, I consider myself an experienced engineering leader in a B2B enterprise software space. That's the space I'm been playing in. Actually, interestingly enough, 2 weeks ago, it's exactly, I celebrated 20 years of leading software teams at various software companies. So I guess now I can officially say I consider myself a professional engineering team leader in a B2B SaaS space.
So how you said like 20 years? It's a lot. It's a huge number. How everything started? But let's start not with your first job in IT, but let's start with your first job that you earned some money. Something
Right.
that you've done and people loved your services, so they will be grateful and they paid you some dollars, rubles, shekels. I don't know. We have a different currency in this podcast already.
Well, I don't know if they loved what I've done. My real first job when we just immigrated to Israel was stuffing people's mailboxes with advertisement for Chinese takeout restaurant. Again, while I got paid for that and I learned the city of Haifa like the back of my hand, I don't know if a lot of people whose mailboxes got that appreciated that. But my first kind of more full-time job, interestingly enough, was a few years later when I started teaching kids at the local community center. I started teaching Pascal, of all things. I'm old enough to know that language.
How you end up learning Pascal to the level that you were comfortable of teaching other kids? How it started?
I discovered computers when I was probably 12. And like a lot of people in our profession, I'm a trained extrovert. And I discovered that if I learn this programming language thing, I don't have to convince human to do something for me. I can go write something to the computer and it does it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
incredibly rewarding. And I started with basic. And then very quickly, the local, either community college or something, they had an after hours thing. And I started learning Pascal. I think I still remember writing Game of Life as the first thing, or other than boring stuff like sorts. And I knew Pascal for a number of years. By the time I got to the point, I think it was first year of university, where I started, I was comfortable enough teaching it to like 10, 12-year-olds.
Oh wow, that's really cool. So what was we were talking about like teaching different languages. I don't know if the podcast that I spoke with Baruch would go first or this one's gonna be first. But we were talking about different abstractions and how some of the abstractions that they teach in computer school are actually leaking in terms of like, okay, so how you describe the object. Is it horse? Is it object? Or is it class? And is it that horse is object or it's a class? Or if the horse, what was the challenges? How you would explain? It's easier probably for Pascal because Pascal was kind of like a procedural language rather than
In a
object-oriented.
way, I think the challenge with kids is not even about the concept of the language or teaching them the fundamentals, but finding examples that make learning to program a computer exciting, right? Like I still
Yeah,
remember that first moment where I typed something into the computer and then you see the result and you go, wait, if I do this, it's going to do that. It's getting that moment of discovery, I guess, in a way. That would have been the challenge. And quite frankly, I think it's the challenge in my professional career today to go full circle. You know, in my role, my job is to develop leaders.
yeah,
And what do we do? How do we find leaders in this industry? We take professional software
exactly.
engineers who are good at what they do. And when we're going to tell them, hey, listen, we're going to take you from programming deterministic fixed feedback time things to programming non-deterministic variable feedback time things known as humans. And by the way, you're going to suck at it day one. So how do we convince you that you actually want the job after you spent, I don't know, a decade, maybe more before you got into management of getting good at programming the other things? So
Yeah,
I think the challenge is the same. How do you find that balance between the frustration that inevitably comes with learning of
yeah,
anything challenging, but with the joy of that learning as well? And I had went through that in my 40s actually. I always wanted to fly. I always
hmm,
enjoyed aviation, and I pursued my passion for flying in my early 40s. And I remember how humbling it is and how challenging it is to go learn a new skill, wealth of knowledge, to get a pilot certificate. And you know, it was a good vivid reminder for me for what my early in career leaders are going through as well. So how do you
hmm,
balance the frustration that inevitably comes with learning
yeah.
with the morsels of reward that you get during the learning curve itself?
Yeah, I think it's also very much depends on age and experience because sometimes we like to say that I need to have motivation to do the things. When you're getting you know older and you have a more mature professionally and you know the physically you trade discipline with motivation. So you don't need to motivation anymore. You kind of a discipline because you know that you know there's a resource, time is limited resource, and how you're going to be using this as your kind of investment chip, that where you will be putting this is very important. And this is a very cool thing that you talk about this, since you mentioned that you were building the leaders you're building leaders for different businesses. I presume, because that's the whole point. We starting some companies or we joining companies to build something. So let me shift our gears into main topic of this conversation is that we like to ask our guests is what was the most kind of like a challenging thing that you ever done or most difficult thing you've done or you failed to do, and maybe you can talk about your experience in human side and human and IT side as well.
I think there are two dimensions we can go explore. One is the human side. The
Yeah.
hardest things we all get to do as leaders is try to change human behavior. That's the reality of it. The goal of an engineering leader or any leader is to get this group of humans that have their own desires, needs, problems, pains, aspirations. And if you combine the vector of all of their directional movement at work, you need that vector to roughly point into the same direction, right?
Mm-hmm.
You will never get everybody 100% aligned, but like the sum of all vectors has to point into the direction you need them to go. So that's challenge number one. I think challenge number two is figuring out what's that vector as an engineering leader. What's that vector we need to go point to support the business? And for me in business, and I've been lucky to be at the right place at the right time several times, and then several times deliberately, is changing the behavior of the buyer. Like
Mm-hmm.
I really love creating new things, and I've been lucky enough to be in several industries where we've created new spaces or new classes of enterprise software
Yeah.
or new spaces, and convincing your customers
Yeah.
that it will be better for them to use this is an incredibly challenging but also incredibly rewarding journey.
Give our listeners example. I know like the places where you have been and the things where you've done there. For those of listeners who don't know, like just give a few. Say, let's break it down by kind of like a decades. Like there was a decade of something, like when the people didn't talk about cloud, or even before, or what's
I
happening
am
now.
old enough that some of my early experiments in the cloud were called ASP, application service provider, or on demand. So even before the modern SaaS world, or the term, I think my first exposure for behavior change and how easy it can be in the right circumstances when I joined a company called Tucows Open SRS. This would have been early 2000. Right around the time you were able to register your own domains through more than one company. Like back in the day when I was younger, Network Solutions was the only company where you could go and get your .com, .org, .net domain. And
Yeah.
then the namespace got deregulated, and we were building products to help people sell the domains wholesale. And we had a network of customers, and they were pulling us into that. And I saw us going at Tucows from selling domains to selling SSL certificates to selling email, DNS, etc. services. And the lesson I later extracted out of that is sometimes there's a wave that is pushing you into the market, and if you ride that wave successfully, you can build a successful business. We were at the time, and roughly around the same time, GoDaddy as a domain registrar showed
Yes.
up, who outpaced us eventually, but we were second largest domain registrar in the world at the time. And I watched, without probably understanding, I was in my early 20s, kind of a wave pushing us into the market. My next interesting gig was when we actually convincing the world that SaaS as a software delivery model for industry, for enterprise software, will be good for the industry. I was at the company called Taleo that eventually was acquired by Oracle. 2007 to 2012, Taleo, one of the four largest pure play SaaS companies out there in the market. It was us, Salesforce, that started in that space fairly
Yes.
early.
Just
Another
started.
company in the HR space called Success Factors,
Mm-hmm.
and another company called Concur in expense management. So we used to be called the four horsemen of SaaS, and we were going through a very hard journey of convincing customers that we can handle information security and protecting their data better, quite frankly, than some of our customers could.
Mm-hmm.
And we probably all know how the story ends. We all have embraced cloud and the SaaS, but they were conversations that we were still having. It was like, hey, you think I'm going to put the salary of my CEO into your cloud system? No way, right?
And how the turntable, to quote
That's
the
right.
famous manager from Office. And so that was a time of the internet infrastructure, pioneering SaaS.
Now, a quick word from our sponsor. Confluent Developer, the podcast, is brought to you by Confluent Developer, the website, which has everything you need as a developer of data streaming systems. And it's completely free. We've got curriculum, hands-on exercises, executable tutorials, the online data streaming engineer certification, also free, a way to find a meetup near you, those are free. Everything is there. I really want you to be successful in your journey as a data streaming engineer, and this is the site that has what you need. Check it out at developer.confluent.io. That's developer.confluent.io. Now, back to the show.
So the next step was, okay, so how we can observe the things, right? How we can get the metrics. And everyone is already in the cloud. How we can help them to run this
That's right.
successfully.
So the most interesting journey I had right after that is joining a company called SignalFX, which eventually got acquired by Splunk, to lead engineering in a completely different space. And maybe the trend that the viewers should notice is I do jump markets a lot, but some of the trends we're talking about are very consistent and can be used to go pick your next opportunity for yourself. Victor, if you remember, you and I had this
Yes.
conversation about your choices one day, and we can double click on that. But
Yes.
if you remember the first two, and the headline from the first two, trend is your friend. If you're riding some kind of wave, you can build something big. At some point, the cloud became the norm, but the observability tools that were built, the the Wileys, the Dynatraces, the Dynamics of the world were not sufficient to observe more modern, more ephemeral infrastructure. So Docker adoption of containers created much more hard to observe sets of environments. They're much more dynamic than environments that used to, change once a quarter when you do a software release.
Yep.
So we had a wave and we had a need of this new observability tools that was pushing us into the market. So at the time, the leaders were Wavefront, SignalFx, Datadog, Lightstep, Honeycomb, and maybe the other lesson I've extracted for this is much like with Taleo and SuccessFactors in the HR software ways, we ended up being number one and number two. You want to make your bet ideally on something who can become a number one and number two, or is fundamentally set up to be number one or number two, and that's what happened with Datadog and SignalFx. Datadog stayed independent. We got acquired for about $1 billion by Splunk. Also, another trend that was pushing us into the market, and we were riding a wave in a completely different way. At SignalFx, the challenges were not convincing the market, but scaling our software architecture. That probably
it's kind of like opposite, because in the first time you need to convince people, but people already was convinced. They just wanted to use more and more of the software, or like bring in more workloads to be observed through the system. So scaling
I go
this
through the journey. That's right. Like the first gig I told you it took us. We were being pulled into the market at Taleo. We were pushing ourselves into the market. SignalFx was being, in part, pulled into the market. And then about 3 years ago, coming up on 3 years, I joined another company where I saw another wave forming. At Clari, we built tools for sales professionals to run their processes better. We've been leveraging AI before AI was cool. And
speaking about like putting your CEO salary in your system, you're not putting that, not anymore CEO salary. You're putting whole information about your company and the businesses and how the people, how the sales motions are working, and how much money company does.
So we're sitting on a lot of the sensitive information for a lot of customers whose name your viewers and listeners will recognize. And this is an example of creating a new market. If you look at the sales tooling market, the space has been somewhat stable for a while. CRMs, the two major CRMs, HubSpot and Salesforce, have been out there for a couple decades. And again, much like when we were building stuff at Taleo, HRIS systems existed before us. We just built a better system of insight on top of system of record. In a way, that's what we're doing at Taleo. It's Clari. We're also building a system of insight on top of a lot of system of record. Applying, at the time at Taleo, we were applying cloud to the problem. Now we're applying modern machine learning and AI techniques to the problem. And it's another opportunity to push. And we're very proud to say that a year ago, this market got recognized by one of the key industry analysts, Forrester. In a few weeks, Gartner is also going to publish something on this space as well. So this is a journey of convincing the market that those tools are good at you. And again, if you see a pattern, if you can become a number one or number two, the rewards are lucrative for the space builder.
Apart from being kind of like a very, I would say, observant about the industry and understanding the trends, what was your like a personal challenge to maybe adopting minds of other people, helping them to grow? Because like building the teams in the highly efficient teams, building new generation of leaders on these different stages of the company, it's very important for success of those companies. So I want to kind of like focus a little bit on some of the things that you observed and how you kind of like managed to adapt.
So it's interesting. I still consider myself a technologist at heart, so I can probably sit down and geek out with you and the listeners on how you train LLMs and how neural network works.
And you're still doing the conference presentation on the practical aspects in some of the things with the intent integrity chain that you did with our common friend, and some other things.
So while I continue to keep up as a technologist, and I've been lucky enough to have a pretty good fundamental education that allows me to understand everything we do at the highest levels, all the way down to possibly maybe close to silicon. What I've spent the last 20 years now that we passed October 5th of my career is reading more psychology books, believe it or not, than technology books. Because when it comes to programming or motivating human, there was science to it and there's art. And it's all about creating an environment. And Victor, you heard this book many, many times. You know where I'm going to go with this. My favorite topic on this is from Daniel Pink. The book is called Drive. And it says, hey, if you want to create an environment where knowledge workers thrives, and by the way, that applies not just to leaders, it applies to individual contributors as well. You need to create an autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And my new variation on this is you have to amp it up. AMP, autonomy, mastery, purpose. In order to do that, you have to influence. And sometimes you have to influence with authority, i.e., you report to me and let me go nudge you, right,
Yes.
into this. Or you have to influence without authority. And again, I'll shameless plug for another book, if you want to add to the show notes, a Bradford Cohen book called Influence Without Authority. Another book that teaches you a set of techniques of modifying behavior without having direct authority of the behavior. And lastly, you do this by being able to articulate and tell a compelling story. We as human beings have been wired to listen to stories and use our imagination as stories. And if you remember my foray in telling you how painful it was to learn how to fly, the most painful thing was to learn how to land an airplane. That's the hardest thing we all get to learn how to do as pilots.
And it's most important thing, as a matter of fact, right? So it's not takeoff; it's
It's kind
actually
of
landing.
important. Taking off is much easier than landing, but yes, if you want to complete the flight, you have to land. And everybody in their training typically reaches that plateau of frustration where, like, I can't get this plane to do what I wanted to do when I want to land it. And that happens in professional development as well. So the question is, how do you motivate the person to plow through that pain? For me, it was imagining why I'm doing this, right? I use the airplane to travel with friends. I have some friends visiting from out of country this weekend. We're going to grab the plane. We're going to go somewhere, right? That was my purpose. Remember, autonomy, mastery, purpose?
Yes.
So I needed to achieve a certain level of mastery. And those are the techniques that I've used successfully with a number of folks that worked on my teams to push them. And sometimes to learn, you have to go through some very painful experiences. And as long as you understand why you're doing this, what's at the end, right? I think that the pain can be worth it. And that's kind of my approach to understanding people that do. And you can only do it with people who are interested in that mastery.
Yep.
And to be fair, not everybody at every point of their professional career has the same ability to spend energy on mastery. We'll go through different things outside of work as well. But those are the techniques that I tend to leverage when it comes to helping people grow professionally. And that works with the earliest in career fresh grad all the way to people that had 30 years of experience.
So I think if it's summarizing, the challenge right now for you is to stay technical enough, but still having scale teams by implementing certain things that you learn in life and how you can successfully and efficiently pass it to in other generations. And you're absolutely right that when different people will react differently. That could be a pushback. Some people would like to stay where they are. They might not be. They say that we're not going to grow, and this is kind of like a wired with our human body. The people's brain likes to be, left alone. Why it is very difficult for you to learn something is because you're forcing your brain to develop new neural paths in order to learn this skill. So that's why mastery takes so much time, because it requires you time to train those skills over and over again. You cannot, there's kind of like a famous joke that it's nothing to do with flights. It's just like a testing people's confidence. And the journalists were asking people on the street how many of people without proper flight training, how many people would land the plane, and how confident are you that you will be able to land the plane? And it is the same thing with the I think it's very similar with with kind of like fake it until you make it type of approach, right? But at the end of the day, there's a lot of things get connected with this, right? So what's your advice? I don't know, like when you the mentor people who want to develop this taste for spotting new trends. How are you gonna spot a new trend in the industry? How you spot new trend? You've been in the different like stages. How you see, and I wanna you bring back conversation that we have in May 2017 when we spoke about at the time when I was like between the jobs and I was considering some of the other opportunities. So it's kind of like maybe it's a framework that you have. Maybe it is something kind of like a gut feeling, you're playing by ear or something like that.
I think for me, it's a couple things. Some of it's the framework that covers some of the patterns that I mentioned. Trends your friend. Ideally, you want to go build something that pushes you into the market rather than pushing yourself into the market. Both can be lucrative, but one is easier than the other. Understanding is the buyer ready to consume? Like, are they ready for the change? Because as I said, humans don't like change. Buyers don't like change things, right? If you like, I've been pitched on a number of new observability companies. I'm like, well, we just took an industry through a change. Do you really think the buying public is ready to go re-architect and re-embrace their monitoring stack? And if they are, why? What would drive them? Is it cost, performance, or is it an ability to do something? So trends your friend. Maybe that's headline number one. Number two, experience matters because at least my experience of 20 years in leadership plus some years as I see demonstrates that there are a lot of repeatable patterns. And at some point, I'll go back to another shameless plug of a book, Blink. I just rely on the innate patterns my brain has learned to recognize. Whether it's about setting up engineering teams and what works, what doesn't work, what good should look like. Does your build take an hour or 2 minutes?
Yeah.
What's your code coverage? Can you hotfix? Can you roll back, right? Patterns of what good looks like. And then understanding the broader business trends that are going on. So I think we went through a decade of SaaS, or a couple decades of SaaS. I think the next few decades were decades of AI. That's one of the reasons I went back to work to like a mid-sized startup, because if you want to stay current, and this is most painful and exciting part about this industry, you have to learn new things
Constantly.
Every 5 years. The way we build software changes, right? And this new vibe coding trend is no differently. We keep adding layers of abstraction and complexity and understanding how to navigate them. And we'll see whether the projections or whether we're going to need less humans or not to build software will be true or not. But we will need humans, and understanding how to pick the right humans to go on this journey with is also incredibly difficult. Ideally, you want to be the dumbest person in the room.
Can you elaborate? Like why you want to be in the dumbest person in the room?
It goes back to, I'm picking it up, autonomy, mastering, purpose. The brain, at least some of our brains, and again, everybody has different energy balance, what they spend at work and outside of work. I strive on learning new things. Right, Viktor, I know you spend a lot of time in the gym. You probably do it for the same reason. It's painful, right?
Yes.
It requires dedication, commitment. But what is it? You have to tear some muscle tissue to build new muscle tissue. Same happens with rewiring the brain.
Same thing with rewiring the brain, surrounded with the people where you can learn a lot of things. And maybe if you feel like you hit this place where there's not much to learn or not much to give, maybe it's there's something new available somewhere else. So that might be time to explore something new. And it's also, I think it's also generic. What's the word I'm looking for? Like not a generational. It's kind of like the human evolutionary. What the word I'm looking for? So the evolutionary. So you kind of like when you start stagnate. This is the time where everything we need to put our our hands and we're just like, okay, we give up. We're not doing anything. So, but before that, the learning always will be a struggle, and yeah. So the trend with AI is also very interesting. We spending a lot of time to explaining buyers what kind of value they will get with AI, implementing those things. So definitely the trend is here. It's a very interesting trend, and I'm actually looking forward to learn more about and how this will affect us and how it affects industry. We'll already see a lot of things, and I'm excited to also see like what you will be doing for the next 10 years, and what the industry will be doing. Leonid, any other kind of like a last words, last words, anything to summarize or maybe leave our audience with a bit of advice or something like that?
I think remember about the trains, but also remember about so-called Gartner hype curve. If you haven't seen that one, look it up, Google it, understand where each of the trends you're following is on that hype curve. Because I've been in the valley for 20 plus years now. The hype curve is the thing, and it keeps repeating and repeating and repeating, and we're in the middle of another one, right? We're at the peak of excitement about AI. We're going to hit what's called the trough of disillusionment, and at some point, we're going to climb back to the plateau of enlightenment.
Yeah.
So understand the hype curve, keep learning, focus on autonomy, mastery, and purpose, regardless. And if you're in the position to choose between jobs, ask yourself which one will satisfy those three. I think you're going to enjoy it more. That's my headline. And specifically on AI, I actually, over this weekend, saw an interview with Andrei Karpathy, the guy that was at Stanford, got Tesla into autonomous driving. And he's not working for any AI lab, so he doesn't have any product to sell. It's a great 2-hour interview with Andrei talking about how he thinks the AI will evolve, what it's capable of, what it's not capable of. I do think the progress we're making and the inflection point we're making for the industry is meaningful, but it's also not end all be all that the labs or the vendors will want you to believe it is.
What do you mean? For me, it feels like, again, being very technical and trying to spot waves and trends. It reminds me a lot of like a web search hype back in the day, and how the web search transformed how we're thinking about intranets. Remember the time that you were thinking about intranets as a domains, DNS. Now
Yeah.
you're not thinking about internet in this matter. You know that you're using the search engine to find something. And the AI at this, we still use AI as like a faster search or something that faster extract our facts and maybe generate something for us that we cannot do with the search. It's kind of like it's not creating anything new. A little bit, but it still requires some of the previous data to explore. What do you think?
So I think there are some inherent advantages of the current techniques, and again, Andre in his interview goes into a much more eloquent way of explaining this. But like one of his examples that struck me was like ask ChatGPT jokes. It only knows 3 styles of jokes, right? Because effectively, if you think about what modern LLMs are, they are a compression algorithm for the text knowledge that was given to them during training. That's the
Yes,
headline, right?
exactly.
They don't know facts. We're building systems that allows them to equip them with facts. I think they provide a lot of value. I actually spent 5 hours yesterday planning a December holiday together with a couple of my friends, and deep research, ChatGPT, and those tools were incredible in terms of making me more productive. It's giving me better tools. You still have to learn how to wield those tools.
Yeah,
By the way,
yeah.
the same applies for the tools we give to software engineers. And it is absolutely a breakthrough. Like the search was a breakthrough, like Web 2.0 was a breakthrough, like mobile
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
breakthrough.
The big part was
Cloud was a breakthrough.
the user generating content, and I think we're getting into this inflection point when it's like AI generated content will be also prevail at some point. Hopefully not, because there would be garbage in, garbage out type of
Well,
situation.
I think the industry is adopting the term of AI slop. There's a lot of AI
Yes.
slop out of there.
Yes.
Although, hey,
Hopefully.
Sora is fun. I enjoyed. It's actually freaky how good Sora is when
But
it
also
comes.
think about this. I mean, if we are returning to your brain, and now your brain, it was exciting a couple months ago, and now your brain can spot on the spot, like reading something, visually looking at, you can spot was something that was initially written by humans or something that were written using AI and things like that.
It's getting better and better. Like, it does worry me, especially the video stuff. Like, you can't believe we used to be able to believe what you see, and even that is taken away from us.
Yes.
But every inflection point created a bubble. Internet, cloud,
Yeah.
mobile.
Yes. AI.
But it also, at the end, if you look at the history of our industry, it also left us with very fundamental set of technologies to go build the next level of abstraction. Maybe
Correct.
the place to finish is AI would not exist without cloud, because that allowed us to aggregate all the content. Web 2.0 gave us the content. Mobile gave us a lot of visual content because everybody has a camera, and none of this would have existed if internet didn't exist. So
Yes.
the points of inflection and iterations continue, and we're just busy building the next level of abstraction.
Yes, this is great. This is a great one. Leonid, thank you so much for being part of Confluent Developer. Ladies and gentlemen, it was Leonid Igolnik from Clari, Viktor Gamov from Confluent. Stay tuned for a new and fresh episodes at Confluent Developer YouTube channel. And as always, have a nice day.